I'm happy to talk about Chasing the Scream if you want, but what I was hoping I could do, if you guys don't mind, is try out something I haven't talked about in public before, and it's something I've written for a book that's coming out in January, and it's a subject I've been thinking a lot about. It's been really helping me being at this conference and speaking to loads of you guys to think about this. So I want to talk a bit about psychedelics and the crisis I think we're in, and how psychedelics can speak to some of it. I want to start talking about that by telling you a story that when I first say it, it's going to sound like it has nothing to do with this, and I'll come back to why I think it does. Last October, I was in Cleveland. It was the run-up to the presidential election, and I was really worried that Trump was going to win. And so I joined up with a group that I've been writing about for a while for something else. And I went to Cleveland to try to get out the vote because Ohio was a crucial swing state, did in fact decide the election. And one day we went to this street in West Cleveland in an area called Slavic City, which, I don't know why it's called that. It must have been Slavic a long time ago, but I don't know if anyone here's been to Cleveland. It's kind of used to be industrial, it's like Detroit without the poetry of the ruins, right? And we were on this street, this long street in Cleveland, and about a third of the houses had just been demolished, a third had been abandoned and were waiting to be demolished, but the city has run out of money to demolish houses, and a third still have people living in them. And we're going door to door, and we knocked on one door, and there was a woman who I found out later was the same age as me, so at the time 37. From looking at her, I would have guessed she was 60. And she started talking about her life, and she was really angry. And she had loads of really good reasons to be angry. You know, you couldn't even buy food without getting 3 buses from where she was. She was terrified. She was terrified of her neighbours. She was terrified of everything that was happening around her. She felt she had no sense of hope. She was really angry. Some of the things she was angry about were not legitimate. She was quite racist. But some of the things she was angry about were really legitimate. And we were talking for quite a long time, and I'm not talking for a while, she made a verbal slip. She was saying what the area used to be like when her grandparents and her parents lived there when she was a kid. And she meant to say when I was young. What she actually said is when I was alive. And as she said that, I kind of reeled back. And I've thought a lot about that woman since, and I've been trying to think about this crisis that we're facing. Now, it's easy to think the crisis is Trump, the crisis is Brexit, the crisis is the fact that so many people in France voted for Marine Le Pen. I think those are symptoms of a much deeper crisis. Which is related to the fact that we now have, the United States, average male life expectancy is now falling in the United States for the first time since the Civil War, because so many people are overdosing and so many people are killing themselves. We have an epidemic. Just 2 days ago it was revealed antidepressant prescriptions in Britain have never been higher. If you look at the figures, they are extraordinary. 1 in 3 middle-aged women in France at any given time is on antidepressants. We're talking about a really deep crisis. And that woman helped me think about that crisis, because I think she's the extreme end of a kind of, she's like the tip of a spear that's being driven into almost all of us, right? That woman is cut off from the most basic things that people need to have meaning in your life, to have a good life. She is deprived of social connections. She's deprived of meaningful values. She's constantly watching TV, being constantly told to buy things. She's deprived of access to the natural world. She's deprived of any sense of a kind of hopeful future or a meaningful future. And quite rightly, she feels like shit as a result of that. And what we've had for the last 20 years, I took antidepressants for 14 years, what we've had is a story where we've told people your distress is like a malfunction. It's a malfunction in your head, right? Loads of people in our culture feel really distressed, and lots of them are going to the doctor and they're being told, oh, this is because there's a chemical imbalance in your brain, and it needs to be fixed with a chemical solution, right? So this is why we now have a society where so many people are taking antidepressants. What we've had, and there's a legitimate debate about antidepressants and whether they help. You can ask me about that if you want, I'm interested in that, but that's not what I want to talk about today. That story is not enough to explain what has been happening to us. That story, there was a really good statement by the UN that said we need to stop talking about chemical imbalances and start talking about social imbalances, and I would say spiritual imbalances, and by which I don't mean religious. I'm not religious. So I was trying to think about these questions, and I was looking at lots of different scientists and social scientists who look at this in all sorts of different ways. And that's how I came to the question about psychedelics. And I went and I've been and met with, interviewed people who were doing, so as you know, there's been this huge reawakening of the science, the scientific investigation of psychedelics in the last few years. So I went and met with the teams who've been doing it at UCLA in Los Angeles, at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore, here in London at UCL, in Norway, in Sao Paulo in Brazil, and somewhere else that I'm forgetting. And I wanted to talk to them, and I want to tell you a couple of stories about that research and some of the findings from it that I think are most relevant to this deeper crisis, to this pathology this collective pathology that we're facing. There's a professor at Johns Hopkins called Roland Griffiths. He's a kind of interesting guy. In the early 80s, he went to an ashram and he tried to meditate, and he couldn't do it. He thought, mate, this isn't for me, and he left. And he became a super successful, he's a really respected scientist. He's basically the world expert on caffeine and the science of the effects of caffeine, which I should be the lead subject, obviously, because I would have caffeine running into my veins on like a drip if you were allowed to do that. And Roland became a real workaholic. And 20 years he rises. Johns Hopkins, one of the most prestigious universities in the United States. He's one of the most prestigious scientists there. And he started to feel that there was something missing in his life, and he couldn't really tell what. And he went back and he found that he actually could meditate for the first time, and he began to be kind of interested in this. He was like, because in the kind of academic psychology in the United States, questions about meditation or up until that point were generally regarded as like kind of hippie bullshit. It was like not regarded as a particularly interesting or valuable thing to study. And Roland started to be like, maybe we should look at this. And he started to look for the academic literature about spiritual practices, how do they affect us, how can people have spiritually transformative experiences. And that's when he discovered the literature, which I know a lot of you know. This is called the Hoffman Room for a reason. A lot of you guys know this. But there was this really fascinating research from the 50s until the mid-60s into giving people psychedelics. Now, these were not studies that were done to the standards that we would want, that scientific studies are rightly done today, but they were very suggestive. They were done by very serious scientists and very serious institutions where they, for example, gave LSD to alcoholics with really apparently startling results. LSD to alcoholics, depressed people, again with very startling early results. And then war on drugs is massively intensified under Nixon. The whole thing is shut down and nothing happens again. Some very scattered rare examples, but in terms of when it comes to legitimate science, the kind of, the academic science, it's just all shut down. And Roland decided he was going to apply to do a psilocybin trial. It would be the first psilocybin trial, because it was never formally banned in scientific experiments. It was just that in practice the FDA, the Federal Food and Drug Administration, didn't give people permission to do it. So Roland applies to do it, and everyone was like, you're wasting your time, mate. They don't give permission for this stuff. But Roland was so prestigious and actually had quite a conservative reputation that I think they gave him permission because they thought the studies were going to show that it was, they were really bad for you. So Roland did the study. He advertised for participants in Baltimore. They had to be mentally healthy participants to take part in a series of trials. And this then was then part of a wave of trials at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore and in Maryland. And there's loads of interesting things that come out of these trials, which I'll get to in a second. But I went to interview lots of the people who had taken part in this trial. So I'll tell you about one. There was a guy called Mark who'd been quite depressed. He'd actually been taking antidepressants for a while. He'd stopped for, I think it was a year and a half, because there was a criterion they wouldn't take you on the trial if you were actually on antidepressants at the time. He'd been very depressed. He was a very shut down guy. He was a social worker, but he actually would, when people asked him to go places he didn't want to go, his marriage had broken down. He was really quite depressed, and he had some kind of he'd been like this ever since he was 10 years old. When he was 10, his father had a heart attack, and Mark had kind of watched his dad have the heart attack and then be taken away to hospital, and he kind of knew as his father was being taken away he'd never see his dad again, and he didn't see his dad again. But his mother was so grief-stricken and so broken by this experience, she never really talked to her son about it. No one ever talked to him, and the way he described it was he just shut himself down. He learned from these experiences you just don't talk about emotion, you wall yourself away. And as an adult, he was really down. And he went and he took part in this study. So I don't know if Bill is here, but Bill Richards, who is one of the absolute heroes of this research, is at the back of the room. I'll talk about Bill in a minute. But Bill was one of the people who took part in this. So what would happen is, Mark was taken into a room that was made at John Hopkins, the experimental lab. It's made to look like a kind of nice living room. And you go in and, had a carpet, stuff on the wall. He was asked to bring a few things that were meaningful to him, so he brought photos of his parents. And he came into this room, and Bill gave him so 3 sessions, and with varying doses. You didn't know, and it could have been a placebo. You didn't know which dose you were going to get, the low, medium, or high dose. And Mark was given the dose, and the way he described it to me is about, I can't remember how long, 15, 20 minutes in, he started to really, could feel something happening, he started to really freak out. And Bill said to him, it's okay, listen to music, it's okay, I'm here with you, we're going to go through this. And Mark began to picture, he described it very, very vividly. He began to picture that he was in a wilderness, like a wilderness he actually went to sometimes hiking in, I think, Colorado. And there was a fawn, and a beautiful fawn, and lots of water. And he began to follow this fawn. And he followed the fawn up a waterfall and around, and then he came to a corner, and he saw his father there, who Mark deliberately didn't think about his father ever. He saw his father standing there. And his father looked as he did the last time Mark saw him. And Mark walked up to him, and his father looked at him, and they hugged. And his father apologised to him and said, I never wanted to leave you. I'm sorry I did that. It wasn't my choice. And then Mark said his dad kind of reached into him and pulled out something, and he could feel it being pulled out of him. And he could see that they were walls. And his father said to him, I want to thank these walls, because these walls have protected my son when I couldn't protect my son because I wasn't there. But you don't need these walls anymore. They've done their job for you, and we can love them and we can let them go. And Mark felt this extremely strong emotion, as you can imagine, as someone who did not think about these questions. And anyway, the journey went on that day, and then he left, and he described to me when his girlfriend came to pick him up at 5 o'clock, and she said, how did it go? And he was like, I don't know how to describe what just happened. And then he went back, I think 2, maybe 3 months later for the next one, and that was actually, he's pretty sure was the low dose. He didn't have much of an experience. And then the 3rd time, he had this extraordinarily intense experience where he pictured himself looking at the earth. He saw himself looking at the earth, and he saw all these people he'd known who died, and they were all telling him this thing. And this was the thing that absolutely connected all the people I spoke to who took part in these psychedelics trials in all the different places where they happened. He felt a tremendous sense of connection with the world. And I think that thing that Mark talked to me about the idea of taking down walls is clearly a metaphor, but it's a very potent metaphor that lots of people said that they discovered it helped them to think about how to connect more deeply with other people, and it informed how they changed their lives. Now there's a catch to this that I'll come back to in a minute when we talk about the results. But this was the word that literally everyone I spoke to said. They talked about connection. They talked about how it made them feel they were connected to the people around them, to the universe, to their own past, to their own future, to a sense of something much bigger than themselves. Lots of other people talked about how they felt liberated from ego. Mark said that he felt he had been imprisoned in his own ego. He'd been shut away, and it opened the doors to his prison. So Roland, the guy who was doing these clinical trials, he was kind of puzzled because it was his job to interview people. I forget how long it was, a couple of weeks after the initial trial. It was his job to interview people, and the people who'd been in it, and the people came to him, and I forget the figure, I think it's something like 95%, virtually everyone said it was one of the most meaningful experiences of their entire lives. When they were asked to rank it, most people said it was as meaningful to them as the birth of their child or the death of their parent. And Roland was like, what the fuck is this, right? Who are these people? how can this, just the administration of one drug once, do this? And that's when this led to then a series of studies that happened at Johns Hopkins, really fascinating studies. To give you an example of one, they studied people who have been very long-term smokers, who tried to stop smoking. I mean, I think it was more than 20 years, but I can correct me on some of the details. Super long-term smokers who tried lots of different ways to stop, right? My mother is extreme. There's a picture of me with my mother when I'm 6 months old. She's breastfeeding me, smoking and resting the ashtray on my stomach. And when I found this photo years ago, showed it to her, she said, "You are fucking difficult, baby, I needed that cigarette." Anyway, so people like my mother, right, hardcore smokers, who tried loads of different ways to stop and had not found one. So they go to these people and they give them 3 doses of psilocybin over, again, Bill knows this better than me, I think it's over a 6-month period. Just 3 doses of psilocybin over this period. 80% of them, 80% stopped smoking and had still stopped smoking more than a year later. These are staggering results, right? There's the next most successful method of getting people to stop smoking, nicotine patches. My mother likes to make both nicotine patches and smoking, which is not really. Nicotine patches have a 17% success rate. So you compare the next most successful is 17%, this is 80%. So that to me was one of the really interesting studies, but there are 2 sub-findings within that to me were really fascinating. When you use psilocybin, different people will have different intensity. There's ways of measuring this. I've got that in the scale. There's different people will have differently intense spiritual experiences. So some people don't really feel a very spiritual experience at all, a minority, and some people feel a super intense spiritual experience. Like Mark, that last time that he used the drug, who suddenly felt this incredibly intense connection to the whole universe. And what they found is the positive outcome to the study, whether it is stopping smoking or the other outcomes they were testing for, correlated exactly with how intense your spiritual experience was. So if you didn't have a very intense spiritual experience, you didn't get the good positive outcomes. And if you had a super intense one, you had the positive outcomes to a much greater degree. I think that's really significant. It's about the insight that happens when you take the drug, and I'm going to come back to that. Another really interesting aspect of it, a colleague of Bill's, Fred Barrett, has been doing a really interesting study, which is he's been looking at long-term deep meditators. These are not people who use psychedelics, but they're long-term deep meditators. And what they've found is, if we grab an ordinary person off the street in Greenwich and we describe the kind of experiences Mark had or the kind of insights Mark had, they're going to be, you never know, but they'll probably be quite alien to that random person on the street. Deep meditators, even ones who've not used psilocybin, recognize these feelings and these states. And obviously they don't achieve them every time they meditate, but they are much more familiar to deep meditators than to any other kind of person who doesn't use psilocybin. There's something about the insight that comes from these psychedelic drugs that does not, that is similar to something that's happening with deep meditation. I think it's interesting. And that brings me to one of the catches to this, right? So UCL here in London has been doing a study, as you know, where they gave a very early study, preliminary study, without a control group, where they gave depressed people psilocybin to see if they're positive. And they found this very early study, you don't want to overstate from this early study, but they found really, really promising results. But when I went to speak to Robin Carhart-Harris, who also might be here, I don't know if he is, who was one of the chief scientists on the study, he explained something I think really important that means we shouldn't oversell these drugs, and we should understand them in a context, which is, he gave me an example of a specific person that represented a more general trend. So there was a woman who was on the depression study, she was a secretary in a British seaside town, in like a kind of quite unpleasant company. So she comes on the trial, she's really depressed, a bit like my woman in Cleveland. I mean, probably not as extreme, but similar tendency. And she comes onto the depression trial, she takes the psilocybin, and she gets all the insights that Mark gets. She's like, fuck, I'm connected to I'm not just some person stuck in an office in a seaside town. I'm connected to the whole universe. I'm part of this long story of human beings, of life, of energy. And she felt much better. And then she went back to her shitty job in her seaside town. And after a while, she found it very hard to hold on to those insights, because everything in her environment was militating against those insights. Everything in her environment, think about the woman in Cleveland, it's not so far off how we live. We turn on the television and we're constantly told, I always think advertising is like the ultimate frenemy. It's like saying, oh babe, I love you. I just wish you could be so hot if only you did this, if only you bought this. You could smell so great. I know you stink at the moment, but you could smell so great if only you bought this. We're constantly being told we're immersed constantly. I forget the stat, I need to memorize this, but it's something like every person in Britain sees something like more than 10,000 advertising impressions every day, right? More 18-year-olds recognize the McDonald's logo than know their own surname. Right, we are immersed in this. From the moment we're born, these messages are so deep in our instincts. I feel them. They are so deep. We were told the route to be happy and successful, the route to have a good life is to buy shit, right? And if you don't do that, you're a failure. And so she goes back to this. It's not just the job. It's not just the environment where she's controlled. She has no autonomy over her work. It's also this kind of the opposite values are constantly being pumped at us. And she became depressed again. And one of the things that helped me to understand that is when I spoke to a guy I'm sure lots of you know his work, Andrew Weil. So if you say it Weil or Weil, W-E-I-L, but who did a lot of the important research. You're mouthing to me, what is it? Weil, great, thank you. Andrew Weil said to me, you've got to understand what these drugs offer people. It's not like, so if you think about how when antidepressants were initially sold, SSRIs back in the 90s, what you were told is you've got a problem in your brain and these drugs will fix that problem, right? And some of the ways the minority people talk about psychedelics can be misunderstood as like that. I think that's a real mistake. What happens is these drugs offer, Andrew put it to me well, I haven't got this exact phrase here, but he said they offer an insight about a different direction of travel and a different way you can live. Now, when you've stopped taking the drug or stopped taking psychedelics, because when you stop taking them, you have to then find a way to act on those values in our lives. And one of the things I've been really interested in, because most people are not going to want to take psychedelics, and that's fine. And I don't think the solution is for everyone to take them. I think it's how do we act on those insights. How do people who take psychedelics act on them, integrate those insights into their everyday lives? And how do the people who don't want to take psychedelics, how do we rearrange our society so we can live consistent with being connected with each other, being connected with meaningful values? And I'll just give you one example. I promised not to talk about the book I wrote about the war on drugs, because poor Steve, who's about to speak, has literally heard me talk about it like 1,000 times and will like stab out his own eyes if I start talking about it. I want to give just one example from that, which I think helps us to understand it. So there's the start, that's the other place, Alabama. There's a study going on into giving psilocybin to people with cocaine addictions, which again show, don't want to oversell it, but very early promising results. And again, they feel this deep sense of connection. And there's one place I wrote the book about the war on drugs that I think really helped people, that gave people a different way of that insight. So Portugal in the year 2000 had one of the worst addiction problems in Europe. 1% of the population was addicted to heroin, which is kind of mind-blowing, right? And every year they tried the war on drugs more, they arrested more people, they imprisoned more people, and every year the problem got worse. And one day the Prime Minister and the leader of the opposition got together and they were basically like, Jesus, we can't go on like this. What are we going to do? So they decided to do something really radical, something no one had done for more than 70 years. They said, should we ask some scientists to what we should do? So they set up a panel of scientists and doctors led by an amazing man I got to know called Dr. Johann and they said to them basically, you guys go away, figure out what would solve this problem, and we've agreed in advance we'll do whatever you recommend. So they went away, they looked at all the best research and evidence about this, and they came back and they said, decriminalise all drugs, everything, from cannabis to crack, but, and this is the crucial next step, take all the money we currently spend on fucking people's lives up, on arresting them, shaming them, imprisoning them, giving them criminal records, and take all that money and spend it instead on helping them to reconnect. So it's not what we think of as drug treatment in Britain, right? They do a little bit of residential rehab, that's fine. Biggest thing they did was a big program of job creation for addicts, and a big program of microloans. So say you had an addiction problem, say you used to be a mechanic. They go to a garage and they say, if you employ this guy for a year, we'll pay half his wages. They set a big program of microloans, so things that addicts really cared about. They could set up small businesses and run them themselves. The goal was to say to every addict in Portugal, we love you, we value you, we want you back, you should have as good a life as anyone else. And by the time I went to Portugal, it was 12 or 13 years since that had begun, and the results are really clear. The British Journal of Criminology did the most detailed study. Injecting drug use was down by 50%, 50%. Overdose deaths were massively down, HIV transmission was massively down, street crime was massively down. What they offered was reconnection. Now, they weren't giving those people psilocybin, they were giving them a different route to reconnection, but it helped to deal with those pathologies. So just to go back to that woman in Cleveland, right? I thought a lot, after I spoke to Mark, the guy who was given the psilocybin, I thought a lot about how that woman, she literally lives behind walls, right? She was terrified to leave her house. These houses all have like security cameras on them, even though people are really poor. They find the money for security cameras. They're so afraid of the people around them. They're so locked in these destructive values so destructive that they could look at Donald Trump and admire him rather than be horrified by him. That is really deep in our culture, right? The most powerful man in the world is someone who is deeply pathologically sick. Something has gone terribly wrong with our culture. And the thing that woman in Cleveland needed was all around her. It was all those other people who are all feeling like shit like her and are all hungry for that connection like she is. So it's about the thing I'm really interested about, how do we take down those walls? How do we open ourselves up to the possibility of reconnection? That is a really difficult fight. It's going to be a long fight. We need really deep changes in our culture. But I think some of the insights, and it's not for everyone and it's not perfect, but some of the insights that come from this new psychedelic research, I think will help us to go. I just want to say this very last thing, just one of the absolute heroes of this, Bill Richardson, I think I was kind of psychedelic Yoda, like you don't know what I'm saying that. He's at the back, but Bill was involved in the research in the 60s, some of the incredible research in the 60s, and he was involved in the research, the reawakening of that research. He kept alive so many of these insights. He's just an incredible person, so I really urge you to go and speak to him, and to read his book, Sacred Knowledge, which is absolutely amazing and really helped me to understand a lot of this. But anyway, I'm now, thank you all very much.